Hello and welcome to the August edition of MyTechU. Today I am very happy to be able to collaborate with Frontier Communications. They've been a great partner of MyTech in the Twin Cities market and Minnesota market. And we really enjoy working with their team. And there's some strong expertise in voice over IP. While that's a solution that MyTech doesn't offer, it's very important that you bring your networking partner in when you're doing a voice over IP deployment. And so I thought this was a good opportunity to highlight some of the expertise of Frontier and really put some great points out there with regard to how you should think about and plan and whether or not voice over IP may or may not make a good sense for you. So today we have Chris from Frontier, and he is going to walk us through the presentation. I'm Nate with MyTech, by the way. By all means, please use the control panel if you have any questions. Go ahead and interject your question or write your question down, and I will either answer that question offline or I'll interject into the presentation. So very much look forward to the next 45 minutes as Chris guides us through how to VoIP and why you should take a look. So Chris, take it away.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining today's session. I want to start with a little bit of background on myself. I've been with Frontier for about 3 years now. I have mostly a background in IT direction, IT leadership, essentially on the customer side of things. Spent most of my time running networks and deploying voice and essentially putting networks together with a lot of emphasis on basically all the areas of the network. Worked for various verticals, and I've brought a lot of that expertise to the table here to assist with being able to help customers like yourselves be able to figure out the roadmap on where to go with voice data and all things technology. So just kind of covering the agenda, we're going to cover what hosted VoIP is. We're going to cover some underlying voice over IP specifics that would apply to both hosted premise or hosted solution versus premise solution. We're also going to look at how it works, what the components are of that, what the critical design considerations are, and essentially, where does it fit and why would you want to choose one versus the other, as well as some other pricing and technology comparisons. With that, jump right into what is hosted VoIP. Basically, when talking about hosted VoIP, it's moving the PBX or the call controller or the phone system to a data center or into the cloud, where a provider can essentially provide you phone lines, phone service on a leased basis, paying a monthly fee. You're running IP handsets at your desktop, and essentially that to an end user would feel the same as a phone system being in your IT closet. But the difference is you don't have to house that equipment. The extensions that you have on that system are given global dialing access through that provider's centralized voice trunking or phone lines at their data center, so you don't have to necessarily have phone lines installed for your voice services at your location. And basically, it lets you kind of offload some of that hardware cost that might be there, and we're going to kind of step through that.
And Chris, it just dawned on me as you were kind of saying that I know that VoIP is very much a buzzword these days, and there's Vonage, and there's all kinds of solutions out there that talk about VoIP and hosted solutions. And really, just to bring it to a real simplistic perspective, is that we're starting to have your phones communicate the way your computers have communicated for a long time, right? So that's really what VoIP means and what IP means. It's taking the legacy ways in which phones communicated and converting it to the way your technology, your PC and server technology, and internet technology has been communicating for a long time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Kind of
They basically layering on voice as an application versus email or web browsing or file exchange. It's taking the voice piece of it and streaming that over an IP network, which obviously we've been doing with data applications for a very long time. So, voice over IP has been around for quite a long time too. I rolled it out in the early 2000s in a global network, and I've been, it's a no-brainer for me. But I know that depending on the customer and depending on the network, there's a lot of pieces. So we're hoping to give everybody a little bit of insight to the key pieces of the puzzle and try to help navigate through it and answer any questions that we can.
Yeah, thanks, Chris.
So breaking down into the VoIP components, and a lot of this can apply to premise versus hosted. So I'll be able to step through some of those differences and show that. But you basically have your local area network, or the network within your office. You may have multiple locations that each have a network. You've got a hardware switch, a firewall, a router. Typically, you're providing connectivity to your PCs and devices already. All the phones for a hosted VoIP solution would require those same connectivity. So the same cabling you would use to plug in your computer, you would plug into a phone. So you need to provide that type of gear. Typically, that would provide power to the phone. So if you have switches that have maybe been aged or do not meet current standards for providing power to phones, that may be a component as you're looking at this that you may have to replace or source to be able to provide power to the phones. In some cases, phones can also be or get power via a AC adapter, so that you don't necessarily have to provide it through the switch itself. And so you have some options there. The more critical things with regard to any voice over IP deployment, be it hosted or on-premise, is quality of service and VLAN abilities. So we're not going to get too deep into some of those network protocols, but essentially current switches would have specifications that meet those requirements for a VoIP rollout. And we'll dive into QoS a little bit later, but essentially you want your phone call quality to sound as good as it does with the phone service you have today, or any type of phone service. You don't want to have the calls being choppy or dropping pieces of the conversation. It just doesn't work. So having those factors on your core switching platform certainly do enhance the ability to roll out voice over IP. The next piece of the puzzle is obviously the handsets. There's a lot of choices out there. Some providers give you a select amount of choices. Others are pretty open as far as being able to fit a certain standard. It really depends on where you're looking to your voice over IP provider and what they can support as a handset for you. But typically we see a lot of the same feature sets and a lot of the same handsets applied to a premise-based solution as you would a hosted solution. It's just a matter of which provider you're looking at. The hosted PBX or voice controller or call server all are one and the same. It's really the brains of the operation. With a premise-based solution, that would be something that would live in the closet or be mounted on the wall. In a hosted solution, that likely isn't a smaller box like this, but it's likely a large-scale system that is in a data center that is highly protected and highly scalable and has redundant power. It includes a lot of storage and redundancy so that they can provide you with a very good uptime and service without having to worry about outages and things going like that on the hardware side like you may have with a premise solution, which we'll talk about later. And the last piece, which is really one of the most important pieces of any hosted type of service that you're looking at, specifically voice, is the internet connection. This is the most critical part for this to work. That internet connection is really the lifeline to making these phones operate. So we have to make sure that we size that properly, that it has the right upload and download speeds to be able to carry that VoIP traffic. And in upcoming slides here, we'll break that down a little further as well. Moving on to the roles of these components. We've kind of covered it at this point a little bit, but we'll break it down a little more. As I mentioned, the PBX or controller or call server lives in the data center. It provides all the call functions. It signals between the handsets over the internet connection to the data center and provides those call functionality so that when you pick up the phone, you get a dial tone. When you call another extension in your office, it's taking that off-hook signal, going up to the data center, connecting with that controller, which is giving it instructions to say, call this other extension. That is the primary brains of the operation. The LAN switch, as we mentioned, is a key piece. It makes everything connect to each other. It applies and enables the quality of service, at least on the local network, which will enhance call quality from one phone set to the other. Firewall is just a piece of the puzzle from an internet perspective, provides you with network security. There would be some changes that need to be made on that piece of hardware to allow a voice over IP solution to work, so it's definitely a piece of the puzzle to consider. But it's typically minimal. The systems today are very flexible and able to work with a lot of the standard firewall as far as getting ports and things allowed to pass that traffic easily. The IP phone, self-explanatory. End user phone set makes and takes calls, and then the internet connection that connects it all together. Without that internet piece, the call controller and the phones can't talk to each other, so it would not work, which is why we'll cover that in detail as well. Looking at a hosted VoIP versus premise, what I've done here is on the left side of the screen we've got a hosted solution, and on the right side we have a premise solution. You can see that basic components are the same for a typical phone system rollout. You've got a call controller, you've got a network, you've got switches, you've got phones. That applies to both scenarios, whether you're doing something that is hosted or on-premise. The biggest difference, and I've kind of broken this out with the red bullets there, is you can see that in the number one option, you've got the voice over IP traffic. Where is that call traffic actually going? With a hosted solution, the call traffic is on the LAN switch between those handsets, and then it's taken up to the internet through the firewall and up to the data center where the call controller lives. So you've got that traffic element that's going out to the internet, which is why that piece of the puzzle is very critical. With a premise solution, there's no requirement for voice over IP traffic to go over the internet. You may deploy some remote networking people and things like that, but for the base system, the VoIP traffic doesn't leave the premise-based solution. It goes on the local switch network. It is either directly tied to the PBX or the call controller. If it's a digital phone or analog phone. In an IP phone, it would be on that switch just like all the other phones. But the traffic does not go through the internet. And the call controller, as you can see, items 2 and 3, is not in a data center on the outside, but it's in the network locally on premise. There's a big difference there as far as where that is. And there's some advantages to that as well, but you can see that the critical portion moves to that internet connection, the number one items. Where is that traffic going? With that,
can you go back to that? I love this slide, by the way. This is one of the, and again, VoIP has become more and more understood across and all kind of levels of technical ability. But this slide illustrates one of the main pieces that I think people sometimes got confused, is that VoIP could apply whether you have a hosted solution or an on-premise solution. Right, so as your slide illustrates, the green lines illustrate VoIP communication, and even if you have the on-premise solution, this solution is still using VoIP. It's just not using hosted VoIP or data center-based VoIP. So that's one of the there's two components there that oftentimes get commingled, and it causes confusion amongst at least folks that I've talked to about voice over IP solutions. So I thanks for putting this slide in there.
That's absolutely, and that's really one of the things I wanted to illustrate here, is that whether you go with a hosted or premise VoIP solution, there is some critical readiness and preparation that's needed from the network side of things with either one. So you've got a lot of components that are critical that are the same across either way you go. So, for example, if you were a customer, you wouldn't want to just say, well, I can do hosted VoIP and I don't have to worry about my LAN switch or my internet connection or my phone traffic. The same rules from a voice over IP standpoint on that local network would apply as it would for a premise-based solution. So getting into that, we're going to talk about that on the next slide, is really the things to consider as you're looking at a voice solution that either is hosted or premise-based, is really, network readiness, looking at that network and finding out, is my cabling sufficient? Do I have the right cabling in place to support providing power to my phones, support the speeds that are desired by the end user's desktop as well as by the phone? The power that we're providing there, the quality service, making sure your switching fabric is current or able to support that. And voice over IP standards have been out for quite a while on switches. So, typically any switch that's been put out there in the last 5+ years has the specifications to meet a lot of voice over IP components, but it's definitely worth a double check to make sure that things are up to date. And if needed, fortunately, switching has really become affordable. So putting in a voice over IP switch to be able to handle phone traffic like that is very affordable these days. The other piece of the puzzle, as I mentioned, the internet connection, how much speed, upload versus download, reliability and traffic. I mean, these things are all pieces of the puzzle. With voice, and we're going to get into it with a couple of diagrams, but the voice calls are bidirectional and it's real-time traffic. So essentially, if you think of a stream being made from a phone handset up to that data center, it's taking up a very specific amount of space on the network at a continuous rate. So to be able to nail up a call between two people that are in the same office, it's got to take a connection out from that handset up to the data center and then back down to the other handset. So with every call that goes on, the upload getting to the data center is just as important as download. So when you're looking at internet connections, you look at a typical DSL or cable, those are typically what we'd call asymmetrical, and essentially the download is faster than the upload. So it's definitely something that has to be considered. Is that connection, reliable? How is my traffic on my network? Do I have a lot of web streaming going on? We'll dive into a couple examples shortly that will cover that. And essentially, wired versus wireless. Wireless doesn't work very well for voice over IP. It's just not a medium that can be deployed. There are handsets out there that are designed to be used in a wireless environment, but they typically function on a different grade of wireless and are provided by specific manufacturers. So you're really looking at the wired cabling and your Ethernet switching. In addition to that, looking at what kind of call volume or features do you need as a customer, inbound and outbound. How many calls are you making? How often are people on the phone? Do you have a contact center? Is there conferencing going on? All those things impact that volume of calls, which then impacts the internet connection. So you have to look at all of those pieces and try to figure out what might be suitable for the network. Internet outage impact and disaster planning. With that internet connection being so critical to a hosted VoIP platform, what if it goes down? What are my options? Does my provider allow me to reroute calls? For example, if my internet goes down, my main number is now situated in their data center. Will they reroute that to another phone line? Will they reroute that to another cell phone? Do I have another phone that's standing by that will ring that may not be on the same network that will allow me to take and make calls with my customers? That's an important piece of the puzzle. QoS, which we've talked about, quality service, and then number portability, which is something I just touched on, which is the ability to take your phone numbers and move them to a provider's data center. So we've had the ability to move numbers for quite a while now, but it's definitely something to double check is if you want to move to a hosted platform from local line service, you have to be able to take your phone numbers that your customers are calling and essentially transfer them to the provider so that they terminate in their data center on their call server and then send them down the pipe to you. If your numbers do not transfer, that's going to pose a problem with your deployment. So it's definitely something to check. Most hosted VoIP providers do that as part of their sales process, but definitely put it on the checklist. The readiness questions, we've kind of already talked through this a little bit. Really, the cabling, the data switches, the PoE and power, this is more or less the checklist to use. And then we're going to really focus more on the internet connection. Cable versus DSL, it may work. Ethernet is typically the best type of symmetrical bidirectional communication method for an internet connection for a voice or IP hosted deployment. Because of that upload speed and that dedicated speed, you can be assured that your call traffic is going to get the bandwidth that it needs. DSL and cable can work for a few phones possibly, a home worker, someone that is off-site most of the time, that tends to work pretty well for a couple of phones. But in most cases, from a company perspective, if you've got half a dozen plus handsets, a DSL or cable connection is not likely going to have the upload speed you need as well as the reliability that you might be looking for to do that. So the following slide, this is a scenario, for example, about that internet connection. So let's just say we have a 3 meg internet connection. If we had truly just voice over IP only traffic, so if we dedicated a 3 meg connection to our hosted voice platform for a company, I could support about 25 call paths, or 25 phones could be active at any time calling inbound, outbound, or anywhere. We're looking at about 80 to 100K per call. In a lot of cases, that footprint is smaller. It just depends on the provider, but that's a typical voice over IP planning footprint on the network to look at. So with 3 meg, we can basically do about 25 call paths. Now, if we have other traffic going out that same internet connection, for example, end users browsing the web, we've got email, we've got other things, those can all impact the amount of speed available for those call paths. So for example, if I have one person streaming a video, that video in today's typical streaming sense, whether it be HD or standard, will draw 1 to 5 meg of my bandwidth. Well, if I only have 3 meg, that video could literally bring all those calls down and prevent phone calls from taking place, create horrible quality service issues. So really, when you're looking at your internet connection, you have to size things properly. And in a lot of cases with hosted voice over IP, a customer may dedicate a particular circuit just to their voice over IP traffic so that they don't have to worry about mixing and what their people in their network are up to. Most people that are working on, as end users, they're not really going to look at their behavior and say, oh, I know I need to make a phone call. I'm going to stop doing this on my computer because I need to make a phone call. It's not very productive. So you want to be able to build all that into the network so that you don't have to have those fears or have those call quality issues, because the result will be that the voice over IP calls will fail. Voice and video are very sensitive to real-time transfer of that data stream. So if you have any interruption, whether it be a video, a large email, website traffic, that's when your call quality will go down. So the answer to that is, either separate the network or create an additional set of bandwidth to be able to support all your needs. Here's just a graphic on asymmetrical versus symmetrical. I like to call this slide kind of the apples and oranges when a lot of customers compare services. They may look and say, well, I can get 100 meg of cable service for X amount of dollars. Why is Ethernet so much more expensive? Well, the difference is in the technology and how that's rolled out. If you look at the graphic here on the left side, we've got the DSL cable version. You can see that the download speed, as shown by the graphics, is a fatter or wider dotted line. The upload is a very thin line. That's one of the things about being asymmetrical. The upload speed is typically a fifth of the download speed. So you may get 100 meg download, which typically on these type of services is up to 100 meg. It doesn't guarantee you 100 meg upload or download. And then the upload may only be 5 meg. Well, if you have 25 phones, that upload speed is going to be critical, because when you send emails or if you're doing anything where you're sending outbound traffic besides voice, it's going to impact that upload. On the Ethernet side, the upload and download is symmetrical, so it's the same speed. It's not taking away from one or the other. So if you purchase a 10 meg Ethernet pipe, you're getting 10 meg of speed down and up. So it gives you that ability to really balance those calls.
Hey, Chris, I was going to ask one question on that last slide. With regard to, I noticed you used dotted lines versus solid lines on the Ethernet versus, is that, I imagine that was intentional, not only to show the same speed up and down, but is there, I don't know if the right word is reliability or consistency or the lack of intermittency? I don't know.
Yep, that's a good point. Yeah, absolutely. And it does have to do with consistency. The DSL and cable platforms are based on a shared or pooled type of medium where you have, various network areas of customers that are utilizing coming into that DSLAM and having that impact on traffic. So as a customer, for example, a lot of customers, if they live near a residential area or even people at home may realize, and when school gets out, their internet slows down a little bit. It's because everyone else is getting on it, and it's impacting that shared medium because they're all going into the same pool of speed. On the Ethernet side of things, it's a dedicated leg into your network. You have a dedicated port that is providing that speed back to the router switch from the carrier, and then upstream at some point the traffic is aggregated, but it's typically a switch network, so you're getting the speed you're paying for from one end to the other, which is definitely more reliable than a DSLR cable. So I'm glad you noticed that. That's definitely a point I wanted to mention.
So that's kind of just from a summary perspective, what I hear is that you mentioned in the DSLR cable, they always use the words up to a certain speed, right?
Yep.
But in the Ethernet world, if you're paying for X, you're going to get X reliably. That's versus
exactly.
up to X. Okay.
Exactly. And a lot of things, looking at that, you can tell the difference because on an Ethernet side of things, a service provider can offer a service level agreement that shows a particular amount of percentage of uptime guarantee as well as performance. So it's a contracted rate, whereas with the cable and DSL market, whether it be business grade or residential, it's an up to speed. There's no guarantee. It's what we call, as best as we can give it to you, we provide it, but there's no guarantees. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks for the clarification.
No problem. So with that network, kind of going along the lines of quality of service, we're going to cover this at a high level here just with some visuals to show you. There's a couple of pieces of that quality of service puzzle that make up how calls are received. And these pictures I've always liked these because it kind of shows you what it is. Everybody's heard of latency, jitter, packet loss, but what does it really mean? And this applies to video and voice because they're both real-time streaming protocols. So with latency, it's how fast does a packet of voice get from one place to the other. If it's delayed, your conversation's not going to work out if things don't go in the right order or the right speed, which is latency. Jitter is variations in delay. So it's going to be, instead of a clear picture, it's going to be a little fuzzy. With voice, it's kind of the same thing. It's going to be like early cellular calls where things just don't work quite as well. And then packet losses, there's too much traffic on the network and it causes pieces of the puzzle to fall out, which means you're going to have a breakup in conversation. You're not going to hear everything that you'd want to hear. So call quality is definitely something that we really expect today that voice services, especially on a handset in an office, is going to deliver. But all of that relies on the network and how it is able to get from one place to the other. In a simple packet-based type diagram here on the top, I'm showing a no quality of service network. So a voice call going from one end to the other may get interrupted by an email. Because there's no quality of service applied that says this is a voice packet, this is an email packet, let's make sure they're in the right order. They kind of go wherever they go, and they get to the other side in whatever order they were sent in, which isn't necessarily the right order. So in that case, a simple email or video stream or something else will interrupt that voice conversation and could drop the call. It will make it sound horrible. It's definitely a problem. So below, if you enable quality of service on your switches and routers, you're able to let the hardware put those things in the right order so they can make sure that the calls take priority over that email. The email isn't going to feel that it's not all the way over to the other side yet. The end user will get it when it's all fully assembled on the other end. With a voice call, because it's real time, it's going to fall apart before your conversation's done, and the call's not going to sound very good. So just puts them in the right order and make sure that they get to the other side with a priority over other data.
And this, going back to that last real quick, Chris, the points you made earlier about how, if you've got 25 calls going and then somebody sends an email or starts to stream video, or you don't want to have your staff thinking about, well, gosh, I'm on the phone, it's using the network, so I'll wait to send this email because it might interfere with my phone call. Like, this is how you solve that problem, right? So exactly. These are things right. that there are things. So don't be fearful of the fact that, gosh, great, how can I? I'm going to have problems with voice. Well, you will if you don't plan it right. But this is the ways in which you can solve the problem, making sure that your staff can use both technologies without having to be concerned about the back-end routing and the things like this. But there are answers to the problems that Chris is bringing up, and this is it. So I just want to connect those dots since you brought that up earlier.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a standard that's applied to Ethernet switches and routers. It's something you can find in specifications for for quality of service that it meets those requirements. And it's really just something you turn on, you program once, and it just works. So it's very simple. It's not an ongoing maintenance item. With QoS and hosted VoIP, this is the big differentiator. This slide really covers where the quality service aspect is in play. So because the VoIP traffic is going out through the firewall and out to the internet, to the data center, using an internet connection, even though it may be an Ethernet internet connection, we can't apply those quality of service packet markings from one end to the other. Once it's out on the internet, traffic is just flowing as it can flow, and really bandwidth does help, but it doesn't guarantee anything. So with quality service, the piece of the puzzle out here on the internet side, you can't apply those type of rules to that traffic. It does work very well as long as you size the network connection and look at the providers and do a lot of testing and make sure that you have all those pieces of the puzzle together. But that is a piece that everybody should be aware of. With a hosted solution, that is one area that you can't guarantee that quality service works. That's really a big differentiator with premise-based versus hosted, is where's that quality service control. On the local network, for a hosted solution, I can control it. I would program it in on my switch so that I can make sure that when emails and things are being sent to inner office, that's not going to interrupt my phone call's ability. You don't want to start the project out and have both of these areas being no quality service. You want to be able to protect as much of that call quality as possible on the network, and then leave very little to chance out on the internet side of things. And in most cases, it can work very well, but it all has to be sized properly and be looked at. So where does hosted VoIP fit? Essentially, it can work anywhere. I mean, we've deployed it for customers in small, medium, and large businesses. A lot of schools are looking at hosted VoIP solutions, kiosks, malls, anywhere you've got, a couple of handsets, all the way up to large handsets, virtual companies where they're looking at, remote agents that are working from home offices and doing things so they don't have to bring everyone in. They're using a hosted VoIP service. Multi-location companies, they don't want to have to invest in all of the hardware capital, which we'll get into in a moment. And essentially teleworkers and many, many others. It really just depends on those design factors and looking at which makes the most sense for the business and what the business requirements are. So why go with hosted VoIP versus premise VoIP? This is the big question, and this is really a scenario based on a small, medium-sized company. But this is a pro and cons list. So the pros are in green, the cons are in red. We'll kind of step through them briefly here. The hosted VoIP attraction is really that there's minimal capital costs. You basically pay for your phone handsets, and the rest is on a monthly basis. You don't need to worry about buying a call controller. You don't need to have hardware to maintain in your IT closet or in the closet at all. You have a switch in there and you're good. You don't need to have all those moving parts with call controllers and gateways and other things that require power and require backups and have data that you need to protect and have a technician come out. Those are the real attractions for a lot of people. You're offloading that call server management and upgrades and everything else up to a data center, to a provider. You're paying for the phone. You're going to get the phone, which you'll pay out of pocket initially, and then you're going to pay a monthly fee to use that phone. You don't have to worry about phone lines on site. You don't have to worry about phone line outages. You don't have to worry about the hardware or doing upgrades down the road. When the latest software comes out, you got to pay a technician to come out and do the software upgrade. You don't have to worry about that stuff. You'll have the latest, greatest flavor. You have a feature set that you can use, and you can pay as you grow. So you can add phones as needed. You buy another phone, you make sure your internet and your network can support it, and you add some more phones. It's very simple from that respect compared to a premise solution, which is still a good solution as well, but there's capital cost. It costs more to deploy it. There's hardware, like I said. The biggest differentiators that I see people going one or the other is that internet piece of the puzzle, whether they can get good service where they are located to be able to support a hosted solution, whether or not the QoS is good with the providers they're looking at, and then also looking at the feature set. Is there something that your business requires out of your voice system that maybe a hosted solution can't provide? There are hosted solutions that provide kind of entry-level contact centers, but maybe you have a large-scale contact center and that just you're not able to get all the support features that you want, or you want to be able to integrate to other software systems that you have running inside your company for providing screen pops and things like that. Well, with a hosted VoIP, you're really using, a model that is used by multiple customers, so they're not going to customize that to fit you. So a premise solution would make more sense there. Local trunking, things like that. It's just, there's a big difference there, but I think a lot of that really comes down to the capital. From a phone cost perspective, looking at a budgetary example, here's a 15 phone small system example of what you'd be looking at. IP phones, same cost. We're looking at the same phone, so about $250 a phone. There are better phones out there that are cheaper. There's ones that are more, but kind of middle of the road, you're looking at $250 a handset, so you get the same cost there on either side of the puzzle here. The monthly fee for using the Voice IP hosted, I just did a 5 advanced user, 5 medium, 5 basic, which I'll cover in a second, around $300 a month. You have an Ethernet switch you might need to buy, and there's some basic install setup. So you're looking at pretty minimal cost to get started. On a premise-based solution at this quantity, phones are the same. The base system and licensing could be, 5 to 10K depending on the brand or the manufacturer. It depends on that licensing, because it may come with 20 licenses even though you only need 15. It's going to give you more than what you may need from a feature set than what you're going to get on the hosted side, but you're going to pay more for that. It will require voice lines to get those calls to the outside world, so you're going to have to put those in. That's kind of a recurring monthly fee depending on market. Ethernet switch is the same. The setup could be more because we're bringing physical hardware to the site. We're actually installing it, we're powering it up, plugging in cables, doing a configuration, whereas with a hosted solution, the configuration's already there. They just have to program in names and extensions. So your total one-time cost on a premise solution could be higher, and the ongoing costs be a little more, as well as annual maintenance. So this is where we see a lot of people looking at, why do I do one or the other? Hosted voice can be cheaper, but if that internet connection is more expensive, it can offset that. Premise-based, if they need to have tight integration and things like that, that may make more sense for the business. So it really depends on the business and where it's going.
Chris, I like this slide. Going back to that real quick. I really like this slide because I feel that it lays out, like, just again, this is a same conversation a lot of companies are having with regard to, should I buy a server for my file serving or should I use some hosted solution? So it's a very much a capital expense versus operational expense question. And the point that you made that is not noted here on the slide, but you mentioned it, which is on the hosted VoIP solution, the internet is a significant variable. Like, what is the connectivity externally that is not represented in the cost yet? But that's where sometimes the operating, again, and there's all kinds of other variables, but I really appreciate the kind of the comparison here to put it in perspective of, because again, this is something that I think a lot of people are trying in their head. Well, like, why should I consider it, or should I consider it? And this is right. A simple way to represent kind of the differences. So thanks for doing that.
Yes, definitely. And to break that down, as I mentioned on this slide, I've got 5 users, advanced, 5 medium, 5 basic, just to show you an example of how some voice providers may split up their hosted service. They may look at, well, what kind of an end user are you providing that phone to? Are they an advanced user? Do they need a direct dial number? Do they want unlimited local calling and unlimited U.S. and Canadian long distance? Mobile twinning is a feature that's offered on this package, where if I want to, instead of having just my IP phone ring, I can twin that to my cell phone, so that if I'm not in the office or wherever my IP phone is, my handset on my cell phone will ring at the same time, and then I can choose to take that call. That is a feature that's offered by a lot of voice providers. It's also something to think about from a disaster perspective, where if my internet connection goes down, I know my cell phone will ring, or I can ring it that DID to another number. So that kind of builds in some security as far as knowing if my internet's down, my VoIP phone fails, I will get the call somewhere else. A light user, someone that needs a DID, but they don't necessarily do a lot of long distance, so we're going to price break that and give you a little less monthly to pay, because long distance is not covered in part of the plan. And then you might have some users that are, extension only with a voice. Local calling is all, included, but there's a long distance fee, and it's a basic extension. There's not a lot there, so that's going to be discounted even further. So with these kind of things, you may see a price break, and it's really figuring out how many of each of those you need to be able to get your price point. And a lot of providers will help with determining what the best fit is for the different extensions. Additional hosted VoIP uses. So, for example, if you're a customer that has a PBX, maybe it's aged, maybe it's on its last leg, or you're looking at replacements, a hosted VoIP solution could be a very good backup solution. It could be something where, you've got, let's say, 50 handsets on an existing PBX in the closet, and you haven't touched it or upgraded it in a while, and you're looking at wanting to make sure that you don't have a phone outage. You may subscribe to a VoIP solution that puts a couple of, dozen handsets on the desktop and provides DID, so that if something happens to that call server in your office, you have another system there so you can keep your business going. A lot of customers have looked at the cloud-based services to provide that kind of a safeguard for a very low cost. Remote workers, if you've got remote workers that need services out of their home and you don't want to have to add on a remote worker package onto your existing PBX, you may just say, you know what, let's just put that on the outside. People can program speed dials, and now I don't have to worry about supporting those users at home. They plug in their phone and they're up and running. Or an evaluation and trial use. If you're looking at a particular platform, it may make sense to subscribe with a couple of handsets to try things out, prove those features, and find out what you need before you sink money into either a premise-based or a full-on hosted. Give it a try. A lot of hosts will have a minimum. For example, Frontier solution, it's 5 phones. But wouldn't you rather spend a few months on a trial with 5 phones versus rolling out 50 and then finding out it doesn't work? So there's a lot of ways to use this kind of technology as an example or a good starting point to be able to make the right decision. Other than that, any questions?
Chris, I think I wanted to touch on the backup component. I know that customers that are looking at this, and one of the things, and even one of the things that I know has affected MyTech, we moved into a new building, and shortly after moving to that building, the power went out. We were out of power for almost an entire afternoon, and trying to enable our, or if just the phone lines go down, which happens. Enabling because phone connectivity and internet connectivity is typically the things that really impacted an organization. So, how do you suggest, or even as an option, even if you're not doing a hosted solution, but possibly using that as like you mentioned, as a backup or a DR to power outages or phone lines being down and being able to route to mobile phones or at least voicemails or something like that?
Yeah, actually, that's something that I faced as I ran networks, because I ran voice and data converged networks for about 20 years, and I had that same thing. It's just a matter of time when things happen. A storm comes through, power outage, PRI goes down or something like that, and it will take out your voice services very easily. And as any business knows, an hour down on the phones is like an eternity. So one of the things that I always did, and I recommend this to customers that I interface with as well, on a very simple level, for example, if I have a premise-based solution and I have my main number coming into my premise on that PBX, and this would be a solution that would work for a power outage, or if I have a PBX failure or a network failure or something like that, I take that main published phone number that my company uses, and I leave that on a analog line. Analog lines are powered from the central office, so they don't typically, unless there's a cut in a cable or something like that, the analog lines typically will still work. And the reason that analog line is important is what I do is I set up call forwarding. So my main number goes to that main analog line, and then I call forward that into an unpublished number that's on my PBX as a PRI or a T1, and that's how most of my calls come in 99% of the day's scenarios. But when I do have a power outage, I can either, if my analog line for some reason doesn't work, I can reprogram it from an analog handset to forward somewhere else where I may have another site that has another phone system. I could program it to ring to another cell phone. I could program it to ring to a hosted VoIP solution that's in the cloud that will ring, somewhere else at another site. I have that flexibility to reroute my calls for the main traffic coming into my company. Then I can take that traffic and answer it and deal with it. I could go home with my VoIP handset on a hosted solution, plug into my internet connection, or I could go anywhere that I might have a DR site set up that has an internet connection that's active, plug those phones in, and redirect those calls there and set up kind of a temporary call center or triage area to keep my business going. Or you use something where you can say, you know, Mr. Voice over IP host, if I have an outage with my internet connection, can you reroute my main number to these numbers over here? And in a lot of cases, that might be built in, or it might be a licensing seat that says, yeah, sure, we can do that. It's this much for that number, but we can reroute you so many call paths to another number if there's an outage, if we have a problem. So that's the kind of the way to go around it. You know, being able to redirect main numbers that people are using to call you, whether it be an 800 number or an analog number that's going into a phone system, having some of that flexibility. You'll incur a little cost for the analog line, you know, to be able to have that flexibility, but when you do have an outage, being able to have that and change that call routing within a matter of minutes while everything else just gets fixed in the background is a huge lifesaver for a lot of companies.
Yeah, Kristen, thanks. You know, I bring that up just because not only is it a way to, you know, bridge a gap between potentially an aging phone system that you're maybe don't yet have the budget, or it's not working to replace yet, or move completely to hosted, or I know a lot of customers that we spend a lot of time focusing on data backup and recovery of your backup and your files and your applications, but you know what? I know at least from the conversations I have, not many people are thinking through or aware of options available to having kind of a DR or a backup for your phone system in the event of power outages or hardware failures or just internet or just phone line outages. So knowing that there's flexibility and there's options, it's just thinking through that and knowing that hosted VoIP is one of the ways in which you can mitigate against that risk. So with that, we are out of time. I do want to thank Chris for spending time and for Frontier for lending their expertise to share with all of us today. The webinar is recorded and will be on our website within the next 24 hours for future review. But Chris, thank you very much for your time. You did a great job. And by all means, please contact myself or MyTech, and we can get you copies of the slides if you so desire. So signing off. Any last comments, Chris?
Nope, just thank you, everybody, for joining.
All right. Thank you all very much, and have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.